I realized I was remiss in thanking Gaboyim last week. There's one Gabbai who I neglected to thank, and I very much apologize for that. And that is Ari Elias Backrack. For those not aware, Ari Elias Backrack took the initiative, contacted us months ago, and said that he really thinks it would be appropriate for the shul, after Sukkot was over, he thinks it would be appropriate for the shul to organize an outdoor minyan Shabbos morning. And we're all very good at thinking of things other people should do, but we were able to help Ari organize it. But really, the lion's share of the work at the beginning and literally every week since has been done by Ari to ensure the minyan takes place. We also want to thank very much Liba and Eric Goldman, who have been hosting the Outdoors Minyan. Surely many people work to make the outdoor minyan happen, but I want to give, again, a very, very special thank you to Ari Elias Backrack, who not only is acting as the Gabbai of the minyan, but he's taken a beautiful initiative that has facilitated tefillah for a group within our shul. And kol hakavod to him, and thank you so much. And again, thank you also to the Goldmans. We read on the seventh day of Yom Tiv of the famous song of praise that the Jewish people expressed to God upon the splitting of the sea. Of course, the sea splits, the Jewish people pass through, the Egyptians drown, and after seeing this remarkable miracle that not only was a miracle of nature, but was such a clear indication of God's affection for the Jewish people recite Shira, this famous song of praise. One of the most famous phrases in the Shira is Zeh Keli V'Yanvehu. For lack of better translation, on just a very literal level, I would translate it as, "This is my God, and I will beautify him." The question is obvious. How could one talk about beautifying God? God is above physicality. What does it even mean to beautify God? And how can you beautify God? A number of the Mefarshim explain that what it means is, I will work on creating an abode for his divine presence that will be an appropriately honorable place for God's divine presence to reside, which of course, whether it be the Mishkan, whether it be the Beis HaMikdash, that's a way of beautifying our honor to God. And that's a pshat that a number of the commentators say in one way or another. But there's a very famous Gemara on this phrase, and the Gemara says that the way to beautify God is hisnoeh lefanav b'mitzvos. Beautify before him in mitzvos. And this is the famous idea of hidur mitzvah. A person goes to purchase an esrog for Sukkot. What's the question? So one could ask two questions. Obviously, the most important thing is a person needs to be sure that the esrog is kosher. But if the esrog is kosher, need a person do anything more than that? The idea of hidur mitzvah is to try to beautify the esrog as much as possible. It's a classic idea. We apply it to many mitzvos. We certainly apply it to things like tefillin and many mitzvos. Of course, a person fulfills the mitzvah whether or not it's muhudar, whether or not it looks beautiful, but hidur mitzvah is considered to be a further beautification of the mitzvah and thereby extending our greater respect for the mitzvah. So Gemara says, Gemara says a pshat in what it means to beautify God is to perform our mitzvos for him in a beautiful way. It always bothered me, how does that explanation even loosely fit back into the words? You know, you talk about, for example, building a beautiful place for his divine presence. You can understand that in some sense is beautifying God. Why does my nice esrog act as a beautification of God? It's a beautification of my service of God. To say it differently, why does my beautifying of a mitzvah change anything for God? That's me. That's the mitzvah. How does that beautify God? What does that mean? I saw a very interesting idea from the Maharal. I hope I'm going to say it over with a certain amount of understanding. If it sounds strange, then perhaps I didn't understand the Maharal correctly. I'll try to frame it in a way that hopefully we can relate to. Imagine a person decides that they need to get a certain amount of nutrition from a certain amount of food groups in a day, in a week, in a month. Okay, so they need to eat that food. Imagine a person needs to take a medication. Imagine a person needs exercise. These are all physical aspects, physical needs that we have. You're going to be very hard pressed to find beautification of any of these physical things. I mean, if you want to serve the food in an aesthetically pleasing way, that's your decision. But the nicer the food looks, it doesn't impact the nutrition a bit. If I exercise in a sweatsuit that's very nicely colored, doesn't burn calories any better, so on and so forth. So the Maharal says, when you think about it, anything physical, beautification has very little impact. Again, it could be a nice side thing. Might be more pleasant to eat the food if it's presented well, but in terms of the nutrition I get from the food, the presentation has nothing to do with anything. So the Maharal says as follows: by taking mitzvos and saying that we want to beautify them, what we're really saying is these mitzvos are not at all of a physical nature. We fulfill them in a physical way, but the source of their power, of their sanctity, of their importance is not at all physical. And the reason for that is the being which conveys the commandment to us is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is Hashem, and He is a completely spiritual and not at all physical being. So the Maharal says the reason why there's a value in using a beautiful esrog is because the value in taking an esrog and lulav and esrog and hadassim and aravos at all on Sukkos is not because of any physical needs I have for them. It's because I'm fulfilling a need, a void that I have in a totally different realm, a spiritual realm. In the realm of the abstract, in the realm of the spiritual, beautification is more meaningful because for whatever reason it is that the esrog carries with it a certain deeper meaning. If I beautify the esrog, then I'm bringing more import to the meaning, bringing more emphasis to the meaning. But that only makes sense in the abstract and not in the physical. The moment I talk about hidur mitzvah, beautification of a mitzvah, I'm clearly implying that the import of the mitzvah is on an abstract plane, which means that God, the entity that conveyed the mitzvah to me, is a purely spiritual, not at all physical plane. Which means, says the Maharal, that by focusing on hidur mitzvah, by incorporating hidur mitzvah, the beautification of mitzvahs, into my service of God, I am proclaiming that God resides in a totally different plane than everything else of this world. And that is the greatest of honor to Hashem, that us, His servants, understand that serving Him is above and beyond anything else we experience in this world. By our beautifying the mitzvos, we're elevating and clarifying our elevated understanding of Him. And that's a beautification of His honor. That's what the Maral explains. I think it's a very interesting thing to think about. This concept that each and every mitzvah that we perform brings with it a whole reality. It might not be a reality that we can touch. It might not be a reality that we can feel. But it's a whole different spiritual level, a whole different spiritual reality through the fulfillment of the mitzvah. I think it's fascinating to think about. The pasuk that we've been talking about is Zeh Keli Vanveyu. This is my God, and I will beautify him. What does it mean, this? Gemara talks about Zeh as being like pointing with a finger. Gemara says, famous Gemara, that the simplest of people of Klal Yisrael was able to see at the splitting of the sea what the great Navi Yechezkel wasn't able to see. Which means that at the moment that the Jewish people said Zeh Keli Vanvehu, they had a remarkable understanding of the spiritual reality that God occupies in this world. Far greater than the greatest of people were able to understand. So the idea of the Maral of Hidur Mitzvah fits so well with the Zeh of Zeh Keli Vanvehu. We understand God in a different way. We see the reality of God in this world, and we see that it's not at all a physical reality. He impacts physicality left and right, but the essence of God himself is of a much higher plane. But because we understand his essence is of a much higher plane, Hidur Mitzvah is a very valuable thing. As we celebrate becoming God's chosen people, and him taking us out of Egypt for the sake of ultimately getting to Sinai and accepting the Torah, it's a remarkable moment, a remarkable opportunity to reflect on the tremendous power of each and every mitzvah that we perform in our lives. And to just think about that a little bit. Beautifying, not beautifying, either way, we create a spiritual reality. We create a spiritual eternity with each mitzvah that we perform. And I think it's also appropriate to think about the fact of this spiritual eternity through mitzvos. Many of us will be saying Yizkar over this Yom Tov. Some of us will be in shul to say Yizkar. Some of us will be at home saying Yizkar. Of course, a person doesn't need a minyan to say Yizkar. The idea, some of us will be saying Yizkar for people who have been out of this world for decades. We're davening for their neshamos, because their neshamos are in some sense being judged, yet again. What are their neshamos being judged on? They're gone. This is the world of mitzvos. The next world is not the world of mitzvos. One of the classic things to think about, and it's appropriate to reflect on before Yizkar, and it's extremely appropriate to reflect on the rest of the year. And certainly when one is marking a yortzeit for a loved one. People who they impacted, whether directly or indirectly, who are still of this world, every mitzvah that they do furthers the spiritual reality, not only for he or she that performed the mitzvah, but for anyone who's connected to the mitzvah, anyone whose impact made it that the mitzvah occurred. And this is also this idea of creating spiritual realities. And it's a fascinating thing. Hopefully it's true for each and every one of us. And hopefully it's true for every person for whom Yizkar is said, that the more mitzvahs we do, you and I, we're building the most beautiful of towers. Whether we can see them, whether we understand them, the most beautiful of buildings, each and every one of us build through the performance of mitzvahs. But the reason for all of that is because, again, the Hidur mitzvah, the beautification of the mitzvah, as the Maral explains, is by its very practice, by its very essence, the recognition that God is so far beyond our realm, but so very real, as are his mitzvos. Have a wonderful Yom Tov.